great to see you. My name is Dr. Anthony Chow, the Director of the School of Information at San Jose State University. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our celebration and recognition of our inaugural Disability Pride Month. Chat is on, so please take a moment to share where you are joining us from. And Sam, if you wouldn't mind, check to make sure chat is enabled. It's always fun to see where everybody is from. It gives me and the iSchool great pleasure to support our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Symposia in all of its beauty and power. And I want to thank our outstanding speakers and panelists for joining us today. All of our symposia recordings and transcripts and resources are available in our EDI library off our website. And also please subscribe to our brand new EDI YouTube channel. So for today's session, if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature and someone from our distinguished panel will answer it. Panelists, feel free to answer questions via chat at any time or in the Q&A. You can also bring the question into chat if you want everyone else to be able to participate as well. I'm very honored and impressed by all of our outstanding speakers and want to thank them for taking the time to join us. Now, a bit about our keynote speaker, Chauncey, and Sam, is Chauncey with us?
Yes, she is.
Okay, great. So is it Chauncey or Chancey?
Hey, it's Chancey.
Chancey, thank you so much for joining us. Great timing. So Chancey Fleet is a blind tech educator and activist based in Brooklyn. She is the founding assistive technology coordinator at the New York Public Library, where she runs a free peer-powered tech coaching service that connects library patrons with print reading disabilities to 150 hours of one-to-one coaching each month. She curates a rotating selection of workshops on tech topics with accessibility in mind and runs the Dimensions Lab for free and open tactile graphics creation. Chancey is a 2017 Library Journal mover and shaker, and she serves as president of the National Federation of the Blind's Assistive Technology Trainers Division. You can check out Chancey's library at talkingbooks.nypl.org. I will drop that in the chat. But without further ado, everyone, welcome Chancey and thank her for joining us. And we look forward to your talk, Chancey. Over to you.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thanks, everybody. Happy Disability Pride Month. So, my name is Chancey. I am the AT coordinator at the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library, New York Public Library. And we are sort of two libraries in one. We are a full branch of the New York Public Library, which means that we serve the public, not just people with disabilities. And so we have, a reading terrace, couches, computer labs, Wi-Fi, you can pick up your holds, all of those things. What we don't have is a big print collection. But I will come back to this theme a little bit later, that one of the things I think that's great about libraries and about our library is that we're not just a disability space. We are a space for everyone that welcomes everyone, and that includes allies. So we are also part of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. And if you don't know what that is a federal agency that dates back at least to the 1930s and historically has provided free audiobooks, we call them talking books, and Braille books to people who are blind or low vision or have print reading disabilities. And this is something that exists in every state. There are regional libraries and sub-regional libraries that manage the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled collection. So to tell you a little bit more about that collection in brief, the sort of old school way that patrons access our books and magazines is through the mail. We were doing it way before Netflix was doing it. We send out free Braille and audiobooks. There is a postal regulation that allows us to do that under what's called free matter for the blind. So postage is free both coming and going. And I don't know if you've ever seen print books, but Braille books. Braille books are about 3 times the size of print books. And you might not want to carry a big one like Infinite Jest or anything of any length on the subway. And so it's important that we're able to send things out by mail. And of course, we serve people who might be pretty far from the library and might find it hard to come in person. So we do service through the mail. In addition to that, though, we have modernized and we have a system called BARD, Braille and Audio Reading and Download, which patrons can use to grab audiobooks and digital Braille files, as well as magazines and music scores, using our website, which you can access at nlsbard.loc.gov, or our app. We have an app called Bard Mobile that works for iOS, Android, and even the Kindle Fire tablet. And we have voice assistants on the way. We are almost ready to debut a solution for, I won't say her name aloud, but the Amazon product will soon have access to Bard. So our slogan with NLS is that all may read, and that really is our core mission. I want to tell you a little bit about my professional background and how I came to be in this work and how I came to be at the library and how I approach the idea that libraries and disability justice, disability social justice really go together. So I think a lot of people with disabilities might have pretty mixed feelings about Disability Pride Month, right? The Pride Month is often experienced and celebrated primarily as an awareness month. There are a lot of webinars, there are a lot of opportunities for non-disabled people to understand the effects of and impacts of various disabilities and what services are available. And that's all good stuff. We need that. But I think it's also important to get to the root of what disability pride is. Why would you have pride in disability? Disability is something that a lot of people, even people who are experiencing it, might sometimes think of as a difficult thing. But in communities of disability, I like to think of disability pride as a way to celebrate our collective community wisdom, because we get together and solve a lot of problems related to the disabilities barriers, the accessibility barriers that we may experience. And I think it's worth celebrating as humans, our individual resilience and creativity. And these are also values that libraries routinely celebrate. And I think that disability justice and community programs in libraries really go together. And I'm going to talk to you about how that has unfolded in my journey. So let me pop forward in my notes. There's always going to be one tech glitch in every speech, and we found it already. Get it out of the way early. So I use she, her pronouns. I identify as capital B blind. And what I do at the library, I'll explain more, but I help patrons and staff with accessible technology. And I'm also a lifelong disability activist. I was raised very young to understand that my disability was something that I would need to manage in terms of my personal access to information. And technology became part of that very early on for me. And I was also raised to understand that the low expectations that the public may have about people who are blind or low vision are a big part of what might stand in our way, more so than blindness itself. So what is the impact of blindness? So the way that I perceive it, blindness is primarily a barrier to accessing information that is available visually. And we live in a pretty visual culture. So this type of information is everywhere. If you look around where you are right now, you can start by looking at your screen. Anything that's in print, any printed material, that is potentially a barrier to somebody who is blind or low vision. If you are commuting home later and you come across a traffic signal, unless that traffic signal has an audio and tactile pedestrian signal, or unless somebody brings their own solution to that traffic signal in the form of a traffic light reader app, that is a lack of access to information. We routinely are denied access to signage. So when you're moving through an airport and you figure out where baggage claim is, you figure out where your gates are, what you are and aren't supposed to do in security, those things are all supposed to be communicated to you through signage. And although the Americans with Disability Act has some guidance on basic signage for things like elevators and restrooms, we really don't have the quality of signage in the world that we should. If you think about unboxing something, maybe you're building a couch from IKEA. In that box, there's an instructional diagram, and it is communicating to you some really important spatial information, without which you will have no assembled couch. And that is going to be presented to you in a visual format. It is possible to convey all of these types of information non-visually, but it's not immediately obvious to most sighted people or to most newly blind people how to make that happen. And that's where I come in as a tech educator. The other major problem of blindness, as I perceive it and experience it in the library context, is confronting cultural attitudes about blindness. So if you look at history and mythology and literature and pop culture, oftentimes we find mystical ideas about blindness. Maybe blind people can sense more. Maybe blind people, because we don't perceive things visually, are somehow less shallow than the general public. On the other hand, if you tune into the news cycle at almost any time, someone will be tossing around the word blindness as a stand-in for ignorance. And while we may like to believe that these tropes in rhetoric, in literature, in history, in the mythology don't impact our daily experience as blind people, and that maybe everyone knows that blindness is a dead metaphor and it doesn't really mean that blind people are ignorant, these expectations really do live deep in our culture. And if you've ever been a blind person walking through a public space alone, knowing where you're going and being constantly approached by people who want to tell you where you're going or help, you'll know that these low expectations of blindness are pretty deeply embedded in the culture. So our project as blind people is not only to figure out how to get access to information in this environment that is primarily built and inhabited by visually driven people, we also need to have a self-concept and self-belief and a plan for how to deal with cultural attitudes about blindness that are not helpful to our self-image and our advantage and our advancement. So between those two things, fundamental information access barriers and negative attitudes that the general public might have about blindness, it can really widen the digital divide. Designers may not expect, for example, that a blind person wants to use the advanced features in a CAD program, or that a blind person is going to be assembling that Lego set or that IKEA table. And the things that sighted people, sighted designers and developers don't prioritize don't tend to get built and become available. And so as a tech educator, on top of the digital divide that we all contend with, I am contending with teaching people from all walks of life sort of how to engineer their own solutions when they need to, and how to strike out into the community and seek community wisdom when they need to find workarounds. So my background, I majored in psychology and sociology. I'm a self-taught technologist, and I started working about halfway through college teaching other blind people how to use technology. And right after college, I joined a company called Integration Technologies Group, flew all around the country and taught federal employees with disabilities how to use their computers, how to use a scanner to read print, how to use a screen reader to read the terminal that they use at IRS, or Social Security Administration. And from there, I transitioned to working for a very traditional blindness agency in New York City. And when I say traditional blindness agency, that means sighted management, primarily sighted staff, and norms that we might not consider progressive today. In the US, the place where technology education and technology acquisition funding comes from for people who are blind or low vision is the vocational rehabilitation system. It's called the Rehabilitation Services Agency. Most of the funding that Congress has allocated is designated for people who are returning to work or attempting to stay in their jobs while having a disability. So if you think about it, there are a lot of people that excludes who might still need to learn to use technology. Let's think about it. Retirees, seniors, people who are undocumented, people who are homemakers and not looking to change that, people who are happily employed, they have a job and they don't need any kind of intervention to keep their job, but they may have a technology need in their lives. People who are unofficially employed off the books, those people exist. And people who don't meet the legal definitions of blindness. I see some people at the library that are using a screen reader or other assistive technology primarily because they have really bad migraines or they have a traumatic brain injury. Those people aren't served by traditional blindness agencies. So this was a daily reality that I was contending with. The model that we use in the US to provide vocational preparation, including technology education to blind and low vision folks and other disabled folks, also tends to exclude activities around technology that are not vocational or educational in their nature. So that includes everything from online banking to online gaming to online dating, all important parts of life, not all served by the formal systems that are in place in the US. And from what I understand from my counterparts across the world, there is a similar state of affairs in a lot of countries. There is a heavy tie between technology education availability and vocational goals. So when I was working at this very traditional blindness agency, although I was surrounded by staff that wanted to do the right thing and surrounded by resources, and serving my community was really fulfilling in a lot of ways, the rigidity of the way that we needed to teach to meet the mandates of vocational rehabilitation and those large swaths of people and subjects that we needed to exclude while teaching made me feel like I was serving pretty arbitrary needs, and to be frank, maybe serving capitalistic values as much as I was serving people. So that's where I was and how I was feeling around 2010, let's say 2009. And another thing that was happening in 2009 is that I was not visiting my local library at all. I'm from Virginia, and I had come to the New York Public Library, Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library, when I was 10 years old. And as a tourist, as a visitor, I was absolutely blown away by coming into this library where there were Braille books on the shelves, and I could just pull them down and browse them and read a couple pages and put them back and take my time. And if you work in a library, this is probably one of your favorite things too, but probably not something that you think about as being particularly unique or special. But because of the way that the NLS works, most libraries across the country house their Braille collections in warehouses, because remember, a lot of what we do is by mail. So in Virginia, I had never had the opportunity to browse Braille books, and I thought it was so exciting to be in a city where there were so many blind people that there was enough space and enough demand to pull those books off of shelves and have a library experience just like anyone. And that memory stayed with me. So, you would think that that when I moved to New York, I would come to the library right away. But that was not the case, because by 2006, when I came to the library, I, like many people in my generation, I'm an older millennial, had started downloading all of my books. We have that BARD system now. What a good thing. We can download books without leaving our homes. Whoops, we didn't leave our homes to visit the library. Instead, we downloaded books using digital technologies, including text-to-speech audio and digital Braille, and maybe didn't visit the library as much as we should have. There was a consequence to that. Around 2009, library management noticed that the library seemed to be underutilized in a physical way. We learned that there was a plan afoot to collect the Braille books from the shelves and box them up and put them on trucks and send them to an annex warehouse somewhere in New Jersey. A staff member informed us of this off the record, and by us, I mean disability activists in the organized blind movement and the National Federation of the Blind. And we did what good disability activists do, not only during Pride Month, but every month. We came to show up and defend. We showed up to meetings, not all of which we were invited to. We started petitions. We got in touch with the media, and we advocated directly with leadership. We sat in meetings where we were told that this was a weeding project. And we said that if weeds are being pulled, new seeds need to be planted. Are there new Braille books coming? And in the end, the plan was reversed. The other use for the building was unplanned. And the other use from the building, they found another space for it. And we got to keep our Braille collection. I work right next to it today. But when all of that dust settled, when that fracas was over, the chief librarian at the time said to me and my colleagues, first of all, thanks for showing up and making sure that the collection is safe. But if people don't start coming to the library, you can expect this to happen again, because an underutilized space inevitably is going to be utilized in another way. So I started processing this in my mind. The library is this underutilized space, and I haven't found a reason to visit it until something like this went wrong. And at the same time, I was sitting with this unrest in my professional life, that there were so many people that I couldn't serve and so many things that I literally could not talk about under the contract that we had because they weren't vocational enough. So I started processing this with my fellow activists in the National Federation of the Blind, which is a civil rights organization that is composed of blind volunteer members who are speaking for ourselves. We do legislative advocacy, we do judicial advocacy when we need to, we do public awareness, we send out free Braille books and free white canes and all kinds of things, and we do a lot of peer support. And we started talking over what the long-term problem was. We always had a lot of time to talk in the activist community because we were always on a bus to somewhere to go talk to Albany or talk to Capitol Hill about an issue. And inevitably on those long road trips, these issues would come up. And particularly in regard to technology on those road trips, we'd be able to solve each other's problems. Somebody would say, oh, I'm having trouble with this new touchscreen iPhone, this screen reader that's just come out. I'm having trouble with this Braille display, or this social media platform seems to have broken accessibility. What can I do about it? And being in proximity to each other and having this disability community wisdom enabled us to solve those problems for one another and sort of share the burden of discovering workarounds so that everybody could benefit from the labor that each of us has to do to make technology work for us. So we started thinking about that, how much easier it was when we had each other. And we started thinking about the library. And we started thinking about what vocational rehabilitation agencies don't do. And we thought, maybe this is something that can be solved at the library. So a group of us came to library leadership and requested to start a computer support clinic. It sounds like a very dated term now, but a computer support clinic on Saturdays. None of us had been volunteers at the library or even regular patrons before. And we had this plan. And we all know that library leadership has a lot of competing priorities and not always the most bandwidth or the most leisure time to explore new projects. So it would have been really easy for leadership at this point to decide that they didn't have the bandwidth to host us, or didn't want to prioritize this, or might not have confidence in us as a community organization to get this off the ground. And had they made that decision, that would have been the end of my story. But what library leadership did was ask us the necessary questions. How would we publicize our program? How would we keep track of appointments? What kind of space would we need? And so they provided us with a small lab with 2 computers in it, little space in the newsletter to publicize. We set up a Google Voice number to handle our own appointments so that burden would not fall on existing staff. And initially, we offered 3 hours of coaching appointments every Saturday, just the 4 of us. We took turns. And as you may know, if you've ever tried to get a new library program off the ground, When a program is new, you may have no takers or extremely light attendance, as in maybe just you and one other patron, and that may continue for a matter of weeks or months. And if we had not been tolerant of that slowness, this is another point at which our story could have ended. But we kept each other company. If we didn't have any patrons to teach, we would teach each other things, and we were patient. And after 2 or 3 months, our dance cards started filling up. And after 6 months, we started having to add another room and more hours because word was spreading, and blind folks and low vision folks and folks with other disabilities that affect access to print reading were discovering that they could come to the library and get some pretty easy casual help with technology. So we started in 2010, and by 2014, it had become clear to library leadership that we were boosting attendance in the branch and that we were serving a need and a knowledge gap that a lot of patrons had. We were supporting access to the digital Bard collection that we use for audiobooks and Braille books. And we were also supporting fundamental information literacy for patrons in other ways to use their smartphones, computers, tablets. So in 2014, a position was created, and I came on board as the library's first assistive technology coordinator. Our staff now includes 2 other full-time trainers. One of them specializes in Spanish language instruction, and one of them specializes in Braille and Braille music. We all cross-train, but we all have our specializations. And more importantly, we still have a pool of over a dozen dedicated volunteers, and those people help with one-on-one technology coaching across lots of different platforms and lots of different use cases and apps. And they also these days help devise and deliver all kinds of group workshops that we offer both in person and online. So we've grown a little bit. We do typically 180 to 200 hours per month of one-on-one technology coaching. At any given time at the library, there's probably 2 or 3 sessions going at the same time. And because of lessons learned in lockdown, which I will not belabor, we are now able to serve people who want to come to the library, and we really want you to come to the library because we want to preserve that space as a place where community can gather, and because learning technology can be more fun when it's hands-on. But we also recognize that not everybody can make it in person, and we learned from lockdown that we can provide virtual services. So if somebody's unable to make it into the library, we provide virtual services as well right now. So there's a few principles of our coaching model that I want to share with you. And I hope that they're general enough that they might spark something that you might be thinking about in regard to community-led programs that involve people with disabilities. Our offerings, all of them, are free of paperwork. In order to participate in coaching, you don't even need a library card. You simply need to visit the library. If you're a visitor from another place, that's fine. That's what libraries are for. We're here to welcome everyone. So we do get visitors from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and sometimes visitors from very far away. And we support all those people while geographically primarily serving New York. We are free of eligibility requirements. And this is important because people with disabilities aren't the only people that need to understand how accessible technology works. You may be a parent of somebody with a disability, and it may be really important to you to learn how to use a screen reader to read things out loud selectively or efficiently so that you can help your child with their homework and their academic course. You may need to learn enough digital Braille as a teacher to support a student who's in your classroom. You may just be a friend or an ally or someone who's curious about the field. And remember that in this country, most of the technology education around accessibility that exists is provided through that vocational rehabilitation services model. And that excludes anybody that doesn't have a disability. And, you know, we're sort of against disability discrimination in the activism community. And that actually extends to being willing to teach people that don't have disabilities. The library is a great place for allies and people with disabilities to learn from each other in a respectful, judgment-free zone where everyone is welcome and there's no gatekeeping happening. Our technology coaching is free of charge. And beyond that, it's one of the only places where we can have a sales-free conversation about technology. What I teach our coaches is to always find out what technologies a patron may have in their home or in their environment first, and really work with patrons to explore what they have before going out and purchasing more things. We also teach people how to be tactical and strategic when they do need to buy something. Find out about warranties and return policies and restocking fees in advance. Find out where to test things hands-on. Find out if there's anybody in the community web that we have that might have the device that you're looking at, so that you can get some second opinions before you make a decision. That is a really important component of what we do. Let me scooch forward. All right. I now want to talk about some of the common barriers that patrons experience. And again, this is about technology education, but I hope that it's general enough that it sparks some thinking more broadly about community-led programs, because I think there's some common threads. So first of all, back to this ability to manage one's own information. One of the most disorienting, and I dare say devastating, things about the experience of vision loss as an interruption, people that lose their vision over time, is loss of access to your own information, the information that you need to live your life, whether that's writing down information about how to take a prescription, or what appointments you have next week, or what keyboard command I just told you to use to find your desktop in Windows. Whatever the information at hand is, restoring this ability to manage your own information accelerates an individual's possibilities for living a self-determined life by keeping track of what's important to them, what is happening in their lives, and what their goals and priorities are. We really encourage folks to explore learning to type effectively enough to take quick, effective notes, and or using voice recording and transcription apps to capture the essence of the notes that they need, and or using Braille to keep track of notes, and or leveraging allies. If there is someone with them during the very beginning stages of their vision loss journey, and that person is willing to scribe for them until they can do it for themselves, we'll include that in our plan. We're not rigid about many things at the library, but we are pretty darn serious about making sure that everyone identifies and commits to a note-taking method, a way to manage their own important information, even if those notes aren't going to always be comprehensive and perfect. This is what we aim for. And I think for anyone who has a print reading disability, the library can serve a pivotal role in not just saying, let me help, let me write this down for you, but saying, let's talk about what's comfortable for you when it comes to accessing information. How are you feeling? When you use a big, bold, large print pen, is that working for you? Are you able to read it back later? Are you feeling secure about being able to find the things that you need to know when you need to know them? If not, here's a bunch of choices. Here's a bunch of ways that you can attack that. And I think a lot of people who are working with folks with print reading disabilities might not take that next step because they might not know exactly how to help. But if you break the problem down into its component parts and think about what accessible ways there are to do the thing, helping someone intervene in their own access to information, regardless of what the subject of the program is super powerful. This is something you could do with journaling in a book club. This is something you could do if you were having a writer's workshop or a public speaking class. It might come up if you're in a crafting workshop and somebody might want to write down instructions. It is just an awesome way to intervene in somebody's life in a really meaningful and respectful way. The next thing that I want to mention is that our approach to tech coaching, and I think a great approach for a lot of library programs that are individualized, is that we are guided by patrons' individual goals, and every goal is valid. We don't put a greater value or emphasis on one type of activity. It's important to get your resume and your cover letter ready for a job interview. It's important to be able to Google anything you want about your hobbies. It's important to be able to take a headshot for LinkedIn if you want. It's also important to be able to explore all the online dating programs and apps if that's what you want to do from a mindful place and a place with accessibility in mind. So every goal that an individual has in pursuit of access to information in the digital commons is valid. And we try to scaffold those goals. And if what a patron wants to do requires some prerequisite skills, we help patrons understand what that roadmap might look like. So for example, if a patron wants to make WhatsApp calls and send images on their Android phone, we need to know if they're able to turn on and use the accessibility features on the Android phone. We need to know if they're able to understand what kind of data plan they have and how that may affect them. Do they have their credentials to go to the Google Play Store and download an app? Do they have their credentials to set up that WhatsApp account? Are they able to put in contacts for themselves and manage those contacts or manage someone else who's going to do that? And are they able to turn on the accessibility features on their phone? Side note, really important thing for library workers to know. All major platforms, I can't emphasize this enough, all major platforms now have magnification that will increase the size and change the colors of what's on screen. And all major platforms have screen readers that can read things selectively and efficiently out loud. My notes, I'm working with a Braille display and a mainstream iPhone right now. We can also use Android devices. We can use Kindle Fire tablets, Mac, PC, Chromebook. The list goes on and on. However, each of these accessibility features, each little flavor of magnification, each individual screen reader is going to be slightly different from the others. And because these features are so non-standard and they're not in predominant use in the culture, they're often surprising to a lot of people, including allies like professionals and family members who may be supporting somebody who is blind or low vision or has a print reading disability. So a big part of what we do is to let people know where they can find and explore basic accessibility features. And I think that that is another common theme that can come up across different parts of library programming that might affect people with disabilities. If you're doing any kind of programming that relates to books, great. This is a time to explore the wide world of accessible book reading options, making sure that our patrons are aware of the Bard collection, but also Bookshare, which is an online repository of over 1 million accessible books that you can read at like any size, color, contrast, highlight, any font, and any text-to-speech voice that you want in a variety of languages, and digital Braille, truly multimodal, very low cost, free for students and free for library members in our state, by the way. So helping people who are exploring books in a book program explore all the accessible options for books. If you're doing a film club, making sure people know how to turn on audio description on all of the different streaming platforms that are out there. If you're running a program, running a meeting, having norms like, hey, you can say your name out loud to be recognized instead of raising your hand because the presenter up at the front is a blind person, and helping people discover those norms that will help them move through the world as a participant or a leader as somebody who has a disability. A big part of what we do is surfacing parts of something, whether it be an operating system or a feature or a practice that are going to enhance the daily lives of people who have disabilities. So we talked about some of the foundational skills. I want to give you a couple examples of really common barriers that our patrons do experience in regard to accessible technology beyond kind of learning what's there. Almost anybody who needs to learn or relearn to use a computer after vision loss really needs to learn to touch type. And that's because a lot of us have a reduced or non-existent ability to use the mouse. And we need to be able to type. We also need to be able to use the keyboard to command our screen readers. All those modifier keys, the control, the alt, the caps lock, all those ones at the top, we use them all in order to drive the screen reader, to tell the screen reader where to go, what to open, what to close, what to change. So typing is a pivotal skill, and that's true for a lot of people with print reading disabilities. It's a skill that's a little bit in evanescence as touchscreens and other technologies in dictation are on the rise, and pushing back on that mildly is probably a pretty good idea. One way that libraries can do that is investing in self-voicing programs. We use one called Talking Typing Teacher. There's also a free one called Typing Club that's fully accessible. These are self-voicing programs that teach typing in a great low-lift way and guide patrons through that basic typing instruction so that they can go on to do other things. This is also a high value for all kinds of people that don't identify as having print disabilities. A lot of people entering the workforce or increasing their workloads, maybe when they go to college, could really use some support with typing. So this is one type of programming that can be great for people with disabilities and great for everyone else too. Other fundamental skills that our patrons really need to learn before they can pursue their individual goals include using touchscreen gestures effectively, breaking down how those gestures work, and diagnosing what the problem is when someone might not be able to perform a gesture in the standard way. Problem could be a nice manicure getting in the way. The problem could be that someone who's older might not be able to double tap as fast, and maybe we need to adjust that. But really looking at how the human being interacts with a device and explaining things, presenting things in different ways to help them change the way that they're interacting with the device, or maybe changing the device to interact with them. On that same theme of device interaction, thinking ahead before conversing with voice assistants. If you've ever engaged with one of the voice assistants, you know that they can be helpful and they can also be infuriating. And they have a tendency of taking you literally, even if you say the wrong thing. And if you pause to finish your thought, interrupting you. So we literally role play how to speak to conversational assistants and how to speak to dictation systems, including reviewing for errors and doing things like including punctuation in our dictation efforts. I'm gonna move ahead a little bit more. Another really consistent barrier that we see across patrons at all ages and stages and walks of life, the technology field is changing really rapidly, and so a lot of people are not aware of the accessibility features that they might have on their device. And again, our library role is to surface those. Moving ahead. Okay. Another value that we have at the library that I think can be relevant whether you're working on technology or not is device neutrality, even under challenging circumstances. So when a patron approaches you with a device and they want to use that device, that is the right device for the moment, even though not all devices are created equal. A lot of our patrons, particularly folks that have a lower income or lower tech literacy, may wind up with a device that does not have the latest and greatest accessibility. One pretty notorious example of this is that some Lifeline phones, the subsidized phones that are available to Americans with limited incomes, colloquially, our patrons sometimes refer to them as Obama phones. These phones may support accessibility features like screen readers and magnification, but often when the manufacturer ships them to patrons, those accessibility features are actually stripped out and missing and need to be reinstalled. This creates a pretty convincing illusion when they unbox their phone that the phone doesn't have accessibility features. And we have to model a resilient, structured approach to really frustrating situations like that. We need to document for everyone involved what the steps are in putting those accessibility features back on the phone, explain what has happened in plain language, and focus on, for the patrons' information, what devices have this problem and maybe what other devices do not. I always train my coaches to ask first what devices a patron has in their home or their environment and work up to buying things later. There's a lot of assistive technology available on the market, and a lot of it is really expensive. One to watch out for is a product called Orcam. It is a face-mounted camera. You can add it to your glasses, and it can describe objects and people, and it can read text. It has many of the same abilities as a free iPhone or Android app. There are free apps like Seeing AI and Envision AI and Lookout by Google that also do this. But what's really memorable about the Orcam is that it costs about $3,000. And what's interesting about the Orcam organization is that they have really borrowed from the techniques that might be familiar to you from pharmaceutical representatives. They're very good at going out into the field and visiting optometrists and ophthalmologists' offices and community centers and really selling the benefits of the Orcam. And they don't really find a need to mention the free app-based alternatives that exist. So one of the things that we do as library workers, while maintaining device neutrality and providing objective information about what the different devices do, surfacing those lower cost and free options that don't have the budget and the infrastructure to go out and sell themselves the way that a pharma rep does. Another thing that I want to mention about working with patrons in disability-led programs is one that I myself really struggle with or have struggled with as a disability activist. I come from a vantage of blind pride. I'm capital B blind. I identify being blind as a source of resilience and community strength. I really don't think that I want a cure if one becomes available. I have a really positive, almost militantly positive orientation to blindness. I think it is a driver of innovation in the world and gets people to think about problems in different ways. I don't think it's a bad thing. But the experience of someone who's having vision loss as an interruption in life, or who's experiencing frustration around something that they want to do while having blindness or low vision or print reading disability, may be very different, may land very differently for them. They may be going through multiple legitimate hardships with accessing information, dealing with the emotions and reactions of family members, the expectations of their employers, the precarity of their jobs, maybe medical factors that might be part of things. And while it is not my job to tone down my blind pride in any way, it is my job to provide everyone with the same level of dignity, respect, advisement, and service, regardless of how they identify and where they are in their disability journey, even if they persist in saying really negative things about their blindness that I don't necessarily agree with. I can do my part by providing information about how blind people do things and how they can do things, and pointing them to mentors and community information and books and articles. But altering someone's perception of their own disability and giving that person disability pride is really something, that's a gift that you give yourself. I can give folks the resources and tools and hope that they get there, but I also have to give them the grace and space to get there. And I think for people with disabilities working in disability spaces, this can be a hard one, and a really important one. So I want to fast forward a little bit to, let's see how I am on time. Oh, not great on time. Okay, so a few things that I want to cover real briefly. We have a Braille literacy crisis in this country, and libraries are uniquely positioned to confront that. So there are often public perceptions that Braille is outdated, it's old-fashioned, it's bulky, it's expensive, and I kind of want to explode that. We now have digital Braille devices that can connect to any platform, any laptop, any tablet, and show you Braille in real time, translate in real time. Traditionally, these devices were $3,000, $4,000. They're out of reach for most library patrons, but I want to tell you that the National Library Service is now providing free Braille e-readers to any library patron who has a print reading disability. So there is no financial disincentive to learning Braille and sticking with Braille. there are reasons for the decline in Braille literacy in this country. Among those reasons is a teacher shortage, the prevalence and rise of speech-driven technologies, and those misconceptions about Braille. But Braille remains super valuable in terms of helping people get the precision of spelling and punctuation, particularly useful for people who need to do music or mathematics or science or code. For people that need to read out loud to their families, their friends, their colleagues, for people who want to read and hear their own voice when they're reading. And there's so much that libraries can offer. Any library can partner with the NLS to help patrons learn about those Braille e-readers. The NLS offers free Braille books on demand as well through the mail. And one thing that libraries can do that doesn't cost a lot of money and is really helpful is to provide spaces where Braille can be explored by adults who might need to learn it. In my view, the key to effective Braille literacy for adults is to focus on practical benefits of Braille. So if somebody's an adult and they've heard that Braille is hard to learn, we're not going to disabuse them of that. It is harder to learn things as an adult. It's harder to learn a new sport. It's harder to play a new instrument. That's fine. So instead of focusing on whether we'll ever be able to read Braille fast enough to finish a book, let's see what we can accomplish in a week or two. Can we learn the 10 numbers? If we can start reading elevators. If we can get through the numbers in the alphabet, we can start labeling things and writing things down, labeling spices in the kitchen, understanding signs, playing cards, and we can work our way up to things like having bullet points to read for a speech, having a notebook to keep important contacts, or doing the other things that might be important to an individual. The thing that I want to close on before I take questions is the butterfly effect that has happened since we started our programs at New York Public Library around technology education for folks with disabilities. We started with none of these programs. We started with no budget, no dedicated staff, and just an understanding of some problems that were in play and that could be brought in play towards a solution. We could utilize the space. We could leverage the power of the disability community to help itself. And we could use the library as a community gathering space and a locus of community wisdom. And that's what we did. And now we're doing 200 hours a month of coaching as well as our group workshops. But what happens when you start one dynamic program at the library is that folks get to know and trust the library as a place to come for quality programming. We now have so many programs that go beyond technology education. And we have, I would say, a dozen staff members who are now leading engaging community programs of all kinds. We have walking tours now, neighborhood tours for non-visual folks. We have 3 different kinds of book clubs, a described film club, a ukulele club, a crossword club, a new music collection, arts and crafting programming, a writer's workshop, an open mic, and more. So what I want to leave you with is that the success of a single library program can have a ripple effect. And I also want to leave you with just the thought that this is not an advertisement for anything that's unique about our library programs. There is a lot of everyday power in the collective knowledge and wisdom of people with disabilities who are working on social justice for ourselves. Because library leadership trusted our prospective volunteers and engaged with us on our technology education project, we're able to leverage that collective wisdom. If you are facing a situation where you want to do something that engages and helps and lifts up communities of disability, and maybe you don't have the biggest budget, and maybe you don't even know exactly where to start, starting in communities of disability and finding out from those experts with lived experience what they need, what's missing in the community, and what skills and networks they have to bring to bear is really all that we needed to get this project off the ground. And I really think that that's core to not only what we do at our library, but what a lot of libraries can do, and what I do when I'm not working in the National Federation of the Blind. Volunteers have a really vital role to play in championing community needs, knowing what those needs are, and organizing themselves into groups and mechanisms that can solve those problems. And trust between communities of disability and library leadership, open and honest communication about what community needs are and what practices are helpful, lifts us all up and enables us all to take better advantage of what libraries have to offer. And that's what I've got. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chancey. That was incredibly inspiring, and congratulations on all that you've accomplished. Are there any questions for Chancey before we move into the panel discussion? Okay, if you have any further questions, of course, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A. Chancey, are you going to moderate the panel discussion, or would you like me to?
I do believe that that is the plan, and I think we should we all take maybe a 2 or 3 minute bio break and let panelists get a little bit settled and then move into the panel?
That sounds great. So we'll take a bio break and we'll be back in 5.
Perfect. Thank you. The Zoom list here. So shall we go ahead and get started? I'm going to read the names of our panelists, and I wonder if each of you could start out by just giving us a bit of an introduction to the work that you do, and one thing that you find worth celebrating or that excites you about Disability Pride Month in this context. And I'll start with Adriana LeBron White, who is a children's librarian at Seguin Public Library.
All right, yeah, hello. As she said, my name is Adriana LeBron White. I work at the Seguin Public Library, where I'm a children's librarian. A lot of what I do professionally focuses on representations of neurodiversity and disability in children's literature. That's kind of my passion. And I also love story time, and I'm trying to make it as accessible as I can for all the kids out there. So that's what makes me happy right now.
Awesome, thank you. Next up, we have Theodore Sapolsky, who is a student assistant at the Musselman Library in Gettysburg College.
Yep. Hi, my name is Theodore Spakowski. I use he, him pronouns, and my work as a student assistant, I work in scholarly communications during the school year, and then over the summer I'm working in our user services department. So what I've done some work with accessible open educational resources, and that's kind of where I'm hoping to land. But I also have done an accessibility audit of our library. I just completed over this spring. And then this summer I've started to look at the feasibility of making some changes. So I just finished yesterday morning drawing out some blueprints for what our library would look like with some more spacing between our shelves. And what I'm most excited about this Disability Pride Month has been the opportunity to have community with other disabled people, whether that's with other disabled librarians like here or with other disabled students through student organizations.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So we have Brea McQueen, who is a student success librarian at Miami University, Hamilton.
Yeah, hi. I'm Bree. I am the Student Success Librarian. I am located in Southwest Ohio. Let's see, a lot of my work actually focuses on building community for disabled librarians. That was something that I really felt was lacking when I was first coming into the library world. I started in public libraries for the first 10 years and just felt incredibly isolated and that I was very much the only one, which is so not the case. So that's a lot of what my work focuses on is building community and really focusing on creating conversations about accessibility for the librarians. Not that our patrons aren't important, but our libraries don't run without having our library staff also considered and protected. And the thing that I'm most excited about, like Theodore, is just having opportunities to build community, meet with people, and just kind of celebrate disability, because for so long it was something that I hid or did not recognize in myself.
Okay, we have JJ Pionke, who's an instructor of information at Syracuse University.
So my name's JJ, and my current I'm looking for a real job, but my current employment is an adjunct instructor at Syracuse, and I teach the disability course. In my previous iteration of librarianship, I was a medical librarian. So the work I do initially came about because of being tenure track. I had to have a research agenda, and I just kind of fell into disability, and it's become my jam. So I do or did quite a bit of research around what do students actually need who have disabilities, and thinking about actually talking to them rather than just guessing. Or talking to other librarians. The literature is full of librarians talking to librarians, and not actually talking to students or other workers about what their needs are, whether that's accommodation needs or educational training needs, especially for library workers who are on the front lines, so to speak. I've published a lot. I have about 50 journal articles and book chapters out there floating around, and I've published a little bit on everything. Essentially, I'm the social justice warrior of this group. I will be the one who goes to the library administrator and says, "Why are you proud of being ADA compliant?" "I don't think so." You will be accessible. Don't make me come over there. So yeah, that's me. I'm excited about Disability Pride Month because it's kind of a thing I never knew existed, and it's nice to be around other people who are disabled like me. And when I say disabled like me, have disability and understand when I'm like, I am on my last spoon. Like, they get it. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And finally, we have Nikolai Klein, who is a librarian for media studies, gender studies, and philosophy at Indiana University Bloomington Libraries.
Hey there. Yes, so I am an academic librarian, mostly working with collections and some of those subject areas that Chancey mentioned. I think the work that I do that's most exciting that isn't normal librarian stuff is working with institutional change, so trying to make our institutions better for disabled folks, but also creating community more specifically for queer, trans, and BIPOC librarians like myself here and also elsewhere. And then have, of course, over the years, thought a lot about the intersections between those identity categories and disability. They're very real. And I've been really grateful to find other, queer, trans, BIPOC, disabled librarians to be in community with during my time, and have created spaces for them to be in community too. My research is, because I'm an academic librarian who has tenure, is mostly in what I would call the realm of kind of critical and abolitionist university studies. So looking at the ways in which our institutions themselves are not just complicit with, but imbricated within these larger structures of domination and control, like settler colonialism, like capitalism, etc. Happy to talk more about that if anyone is interested. Maybe no one is, which is fine. I think for Disability Pride Month, one of the things that it's been most kind of heartening and exciting is I help organize and run a bookstore, a small bookstore in Bloomington, and having people come in and see the displays that we've made, and get excited to talk about books, to share books that we've read, to share books that we should have on our shelves has been a lot of fun. Talking with people in the bookstore is always great, but having people come in and say, this book really made me feel seen. This book made me feel like I wasn't alone in the world, has been great over the past few weeks.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump into these questions, and folks can just, panelists, if you just want to unmute, and we'll kind of do it popcorn style. Not everybody needs to answer every question, but you can. So we'll start out here. What is a way that you see that libraries can support members of your community, particularly communities of disability?
I'll jump in. I will say, like, the number one issue about libraries supporting disabled communities or people with disabilities in general is just believe that we exist. Period. And that, you know, just because you can't see a disability, you know, a wheelchair or whatever, doesn't mean that disability isn't real. If I'm telling you I need to sit down right now, it's because I need to sit down right now. Even if I'm not using a walker. You know, if I'm telling you that I need the lights off, I need the lights off. This is not a debate. So I think the biggest issue is believe your patrons and your employees when they say, I need a thing. They're not asking for special treatment, right? And when you push back and say, well, if I give it to you, then it's a precedent and I have to give it to everybody. That's you being ableist. Just because you give a standing desk to an employee as an accommodation doesn't mean you have to give that accommodation to everybody, right? It's an accommodation. So yeah, militant social justice warrior.
That
Okay.
makes sense. You know, believe disabled people is a good way to go. And I'll say a caveat to that just really quickly. You know, I often hear libraries say, we'd like to do some accessibility programming, we'd like to do some disability programming, but we don't have a lot of disabled people who come to the library. Well, no, if you're not providing accessible programming and you're not providing disability affirming spaces, you probably don't. And so there's this cycle that needs to be disrupted. I'll give an example. I, for a long time, avoided art museums because I had a couple experiences growing up where I'd go to an art museum, everything was behind glass, my family was happy, I was bored, and so I stopped going to art museums. And it takes a counter experience. It takes some encouragement, probably some outreach to get somebody back once they've decided that a community space is not for them. And I think it's worth that extra effort to create disability affirming programs that people want to go to, and then taking some extra time to publicize and outreach about those so that you can reverse the tide of people who think the library is not for them. I think Adriana had a hand up, maybe?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and be like, yeah, I totally agree with with a lot of what JJ is saying there. With just everything like the invisible disabilities, us knowing our own needs. I feel like I would add that, you know, going off of what you said about libraries thinking they don't have disabled patrons because they're not accessible enough, like, you know, we kind of get sometimes people who are scared that accessibility is going to be too hard or too difficult or cost too much. And I think it's important for libraries to know that, you know, there are so many easy, simple, free things you can do. And like the most basic one is just like put something on your flyer for an event that says reach out to this person to talk about accommodations. And then, you're opening that line of communication, and that sometimes can be all you need to get moving and get those disabled folks included. So I think that's a big important way that a library can start supporting disabled members of the community, is reaching out to them so they can come and participate.
Awesome. Anybody else have ideas on this question before I move on?
Yeah, I have something to add to what
Go for it.
you just said about like accessibility statement for events. I also think just in general for the library building, like having accessibility policy. And if someone comes to the checkout desk and says, "Hey, I can't get to the second floor because your elevator's not big enough," or, "Oh, I'm having trouble using the catalog because my screen reader won't read it." No, okay, who in the library is going to make sure that challenge gets support? Who's going to, even if we can't expand the elevator this year, make sure they know about how they can get books brought down to the first floor for them? So making sure that you're collecting that feedback from patrons, and that once you collect that feedback, it's going somewhere. Because like Chansey just said, um, if someone gives that feedback and then it goes nowhere, they're not going to come back to the library. But if someone gives that feedback and then they see that it's listened to and taken into account, then even if the solution isn't like a perfect fix, that shows them that you want to hear their feedback, and then you'll keep hearing their feedback, and now you do hear from the community, and okay, it's not just we want to do something about disability, maybe we should. It's okay, well, this person and this person have suggested that we do this. Let's make a plan, because we know that if we do this, people are actually going to use it.
Awesome. That went by real. Oh, I think it's Nikolai has a hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna, building on what we said in the chat, I think we should assume that someone disabled is using our spaces and services always, and we should think about that when we are designing our spaces and services. And I think making sure that you are considering as many body minds as you can whenever you're designing a space or a service, and make sure that people don't need to go looking for buried information or asking about what is available to them, putting that at the forefront as much as possible. And I think my kind of like slightly higher level point that I would say is deconstruct the idea that accommodations, accessibility strategies and activities are themselves special treatment, but rather think about them as something that should be available for anyone who needs them, and also just makes the experience of being in a space or using a service better for probably most people.
Nice. Okay, Bree, I think you're next.
Yeah, and to just continue that conversation, one of my favorite things about like working in libraries and being a source of like information and knowledge is getting to be creative and how we like look at and create information and knowledge. And so I think there's a lot of ways to create accommodations in like really creative and unique new ways. And so I think that's something really excited. I think libraries should embrace like being creative in these areas, and just really thinking about what fun new ways we can create accessible spaces. Because oftentimes once you've met like accommodation needs for many, it's like very welcoming to all. So I mean that universal design is very critical.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of, I don't mean to put you on the spot, so maybe this is a question for anyone. Can you think of, just off the top of your head, a creative approach to an accommodation that you've seen and liked that might inspire other people?
I mean, I can kind of speak for myself. So I have really bad ADHD. I struggle with like executive function, initiating tasks and stuff like that. And so accommodation that's like been really helpful for me is like creating a dedicated space where we can sit together and work together and like body double. And it's now something that I'm starting to do with my students as well. So I'm student success. I'm very, very like student centric in my role. And during finals week, I just like told students who had like disclosed to me that they had ADHD and this was something they were struggling with, that I will be sitting here from these hours, and like we worked together, and I got so much of my own work done, even though I was actually like there for the students. And it was just so overwhelmingly positive, and I got really great feedback, and it's something I'm going to try and figure out how to like advertise to the full student body and like and implement throughout the school year and not just during finals week. So like it was something that just started as like me and a coworker realized we worked good together, and then my manager's like, oh wait, I actually work really well when we body double. And it's just like kind of flowered, like bloomed into this bigger thing.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything like that they'd like to share? Going once. All right, I'm going to go to the next question for now. So, who among you has advice, either professional or educational advice, for your past self? What do you wish you'd known about this field or serving these communities sooner than you learned it? Oh, Adriana.
Hi. Yeah, so for me, I think that really early in life, I fell into this whole like vocational awe type of thing that we see in libraries, where I thought I needed to work harder and sacrifice and, make sure that I was, basically burning myself out in order to be successful. And if I could go back and tell myself that, I can say, like, hey, you don't need to push yourself past your limit. You don't need to earn your spot by, giving 110% 24 hours a day. Something that I've heard said, which I think is true, is that a lot of neurotypical people don't work 8 hours nonstop. They take breaks, they go to the water cooler, they just kind of chat with each other, they, take a mental break and do something. But as a young autistic worker, I didn't know that. And I thought I had to be on 100%, 8 hours straight, never really, and that again leads to burnout. So I think that I would tell my younger self to make sure to take it easy, because I'll be a better librarian when I'm not burned out.
Yes. I see JJ.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, this is such a loaded question because I end up going completely split down the middle, which is don't make any changes at all, right? I mean, my terrible experiences have made me the person that I am, have made me that social justice warrior. On the other hand, there's a part of me that is like, just, don't say anything. Find a different job, go to a different place. Don't rock the boat because the cost is astronomical. At least for me. So, the cost in emotions, the cost in work, the cost in financially, in all sorts of different directions. I mean, I recently told somebody that when I didn't get tenure, and I'm a year later, I'm still looking for a job, like, is my career over? I can't find work. Yeah, so, as I said, you flip a quarter. On a Monday, I'm like, I wouldn't change anything. On a Tuesday, oh, why did I do this? I think ultimately, though, I wouldn't change anything. And if I could go back to my newly diagnosed and newly aware self, I would say, armor up. This is gonna be a hot mess, and it's gonna be painful, and it's gonna suck. But you're gonna change the world, and that's what's gonna make it worth it. I know that I have changed people's lives. I know that I'm changing the profession with my work. And I'm doing that for the better. And that's part of my values, is that you leave the world better than how you found it. And I know I'm doing that. All that kind of makes me sound like egotistical, but it's what I got.
No, I mean, I think it's really powerful to think, especially when you're in challenging circumstances vocationally or anywhere. Some days it can feel like, the sum of your problems is all that you've got. And when we're pushing against accessibility frictions and disability related barriers, that can be really depleting. And I think it is self-care and ultimately community care to celebrate your successes so you can get up and do it again the next day, because it's not always the easiest thing, right? I see Bree.
Yeah, I think my advice for past self, both like professionally and educationally, is you are disabled enough. I think there was this idea that because I could mask so well for like my ADHD and my anxiety and stuff like that, and could get through without accommodations, that I was not disabled enough to ask for the accommodations. And I just look back at all of the burnout that I did not know was burnout that did not need to happen. And I don't, kind of like you, JJ, I'm not sure I would say I regret that burnout, because I learned from it and it's gotten me to where I am. But also, what could I have achieved had I not been so burnt out? It's like catch-22. So I think that's the big one for me, is that you are disabled enough and you deserve to like take up that space and ask for those accommodations and get the care that you deserve. The second thing I think would be, it's okay to disclose. This is a very personal thing. I don't think I would recommend this for everyone. It's going to be based on your circumstances. But once I started being honest about my disabilities, I found other librarians who were also disabled. And we've just built this really amazing community that's meant so much and has been such a great space of support. And so I wish I would have been a little more like disclosed earlier and had that support earlier. So I think those are mine.
Awesome. And Nikolai?
Yeah, I will second, and I relate to so much of what you were just saying, Ree, and also just riffing on what JJ was saying. I think I relate to that, and I guess I wouldn't change anything that makes me more palatable or relatable or easier to deal with for my institution in particular, or for anyone in it. But I would offer suggestions to myself that I think would have helped me move through my own life with more ease. Like going slower, taking my time, mask less, right? We feel so much like we need to rush and achieve and perform in ways that end up causing us harm. And that's by design. I think there are real reasons why that is, because in some ways our livelihoods do depend on doing that. And there are real repercussions and consequences to not doing that. But I think that's why my main suggestion here is to find, create, and really be nourished in community, because not only are we stronger together, but we're also, I think, better and more lovingly held when we move through the world with other people.
That's great. So the next question I have here is a little bit related, but what is something that you would want people who do what you do to know, people who are thinking about getting into your area of library work? When someone's new to the work in this context, what would you like them to know?
I can go ahead and jump in. Something that I talked about a lot when I was working with new librarians in training is to kind of not get lost in this idea of what a librarian is supposed to be. Like, if you don't like a particular type of program, like if you don't like art, don't force yourself to do that. Like, find something that you love and someone there will want to do it. So for me, it's like, I'm not a book club person, but I'm a Dungeons and Dragons person, and people want to come to the library and play D&D. So for me, it's like emphasizing, find that thing that you love, that you can specialize in, and try and find a place where you can use it. And for me, that's kind of been what has led to the most success for my career, is to just keep following what I love.
Awesome. And Bree?
Yeah, I said this kind of earlier, but I also think it's be creative, be open, be curious. So much of my career is an accident. I never even knew I wanted to be a librarian until I was there. And so I think that's a really big part of finding out where you belong in the profession, because the profession itself is so large. I swore I would never work in children's, and I was a children librarian for years, and I love it and I miss it every day, even though I absolutely love my job now too. So I think a really big part of it is just like staying curious, being open to trying new things, but also like setting your boundaries and recognizing like when things aren't for you. I am not a cataloger. That's not for me. It's not for anybody else either. They don't want me doing that. So I think it's really important to just like be open with yourself, explore things, but like set necessary boundaries at the same time.
Awesome. And then JJ?
All right, I'm doing the reality check. You know, go in with your eyes open. This profession is ableist. This profession is racist. This profession is misogynist. This profession is all those things. And yeah, there are people fighting the good fight, but you're still going to run into rampant ableism. You're still going to run into a lot of things that are going to hurt you. And a lot of times that's brushed under the carpet, right? Or we acknowledge that it exists, but in a DEIA performativity kind of way. So we will have a speaker come in, but we're not actually going to look at how our policies negatively affect people of color, negatively affect people with disabilities, and so forth. So go in with your eyes open, and as Bree said, take care of yourself. Boundary setting. I tell my students, you know, it's a class about disability, but it's also kind of like I do a lot of mentoring class of life in my course. And I tell students, I'm like, set your boundaries and stick to them. No is a full sentence. And sometimes my students are like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah. So I'm the first one to tell you, I love being a librarian. I love it. I fell into this profession largely by accident and fell in love with it. And so a lot of the things that have happened to me that have been negative have just broken my heart, of having to fight so hard for accommodations and not getting tenure and etc. On the other hand, I've had some of the most amazing experiences, right? Like being the sighted, the seeing eye human information professional for a visually disabled student and helping her get her master's and PhD. Like the look on her face every time, I sent her home with a digital stack of stuff that she needed and that I was able to find for her. Because of course our databases are crap when it comes to the screen readers and accessibility, though that is changing, thankfully. But yeah, like there's some stuff that's so rewarding about being a librarian. Does it balance out the crap you're going to go through? I wouldn't still be here if I thought the answer was no. Though I am stubborn and don't know when to quit, so your mileage may vary.
Got it. All right, Theodore.
Yeah, so in some ways it feels weird to answer this question because I still am just starting out in this field. I mean, I'm still an undergraduate student, but I think that if I frame it as like one of the most important lessons that I've learned in the past couple of years, it's that you don't have to be fixing everything to be making a difference. Um, and that's important because if you think if what you're measuring yourself up against is doing everything, then you're always going to fall short. But if what you're measuring up against is, okay, let's look at what was here on this campus when I came to this institution. I say campus because I work in and live and do all of the things in academia. But if what you're measuring up against is, let's look at this institution when I got here and let's look at this institution as I'm leaving, you're going to see a lot more than if you're looking at what should this institution look like. And that's unfortunate because, we would like our institutions to look the way they should look. We would like them to be ADA compliant as a bare minimum, and they're not. And it's not going to be in 6 months when I graduate. But that doesn't mean that the advocacy that I've done and the advocacy that the people around me have done hasn't made a change. So it's just looking at that, not comparing yourself to doing everything. But no, I can see that what I've done here and that helps the burnout. It doesn't make the burnout not happen, but it does at least provide what's the word? Barricade is not the right word, but something along those lines against it.
A way to measure, I guess, the way I look at it is like we are each a human being and we're acting at a human scale. And as information workers, library workers, hopefully we're really aware of the social context that we're working and living in, and we're aware of intersectional issues. And so we're aware of a lot of really entrenched systemic problems. That's kind of part of our job, is to know those things, and knowing those things and measuring them against what we're able to accomplish is sometimes a bit overwhelming, but I look at it as recognizing your impact on a human scale. You've identified the thing that you're both qualified and willing to do. Go do it. And keeping that burnout at bay is so important. So I think I got everybody in this round. Let me check the top. Oh, Nikolai.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, speaking of institutions, I think what I found, and I think we often find, is that our institutions will take and take and take from us if we let them, even ones run by otherwise so-called well-meaning people or people who see themselves that way, whether their actions support that belief or not. And so I don't say that in order to fault or suggest that we must approach this as individuals, but rather I think to help encourage all of us, especially disabled people, to approach systemic and structural problems systemically, to approach them at the root and approach them collectively. We also need to do what we can to make this field better for as many people as we can, which also isn't to suggest we simply live to serve and sacrifice ourselves in these efforts. But I think, as JJ said, we need to know what we're getting ourselves into and enter, as he said, with our eyes open, right? So that we can leave the field in our libraries better than we found them. And then riffing on Theodore, in the ways that we can, big or small.
So my next question here is, how can, and I have a feeling people are going to have big responses to this, how can individual librarians who might not have institutional backing still continue to support accessibility? What actions can we take when we're in an institutionally challenging environment? And we'll start with Bree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost is just be knowledgeable. There's so many wonderful scholars in the field and disability justice in general doing work, very like accessible work like this. It does not have to be super scholarly in every aspect, but just be knowledgeable. And because that gives you that, like, when we can't make institutional changes, we can at least make personal change, like changes on a more personal level. You might be able to interact with a coworker and make them feel supported in ways that they've never felt before, or have a better understanding of what role you play as an individual in making your instruction or your programs at the public library or something more accessible for the community members and patrons and students who are coming into your classrooms. They don't have to be great sweeping changes, but none of this is going to happen if you're not knowledgeable about what these changes need to be and how you can support disabled people. And then I think JJ's already said it once, but talk to us, like invite disabled people to the conversation, nothing about us without us. So I think that's really where we're at. I have more thoughts, but I want to make sure I don't take up all the time, so I will let others speak as well. But like, there's so many little things. It doesn't have to be large sweeping things.
Okay, JJ, I think you're next.
Like, I'm not going to answer this question. I mean, like, come on. I could go on for the rest of our 19 minutes answering this question, but I would say exactly what Bree was mentioning is that sometimes it's actually the smallest things that make the largest impact. Not too long after I got to my previous position, I added my pronouns. I changed pronouns and added them to my email handle. And I didn't ask permission. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just did it. And I wasn't I wasn't even really thinking about it. And I didn't really realize that I didn't see anybody else with pronouns, but in their email handles. And I did it partially because I was making a pronoun change and to help people remember that my pronouns changed from she to him. And then all of a sudden, within a year, almost everybody in the library had their pronouns in their email tags. And more than one person came up to me and said, you know, because your email had that, I felt like I could do it too.
Nice.
And yeah, it was a really valuable moment. Because I'm so used to being loud and cannonballing into the pool and being, I'm the guy that you give the flag and you say, JJ, that flag up that hill, you're leading the vanguard. And I'm like, let's go. Right? That's me. So doing something that was so quiet that had such a big impact was actually a really big deal to me. Because it taught me a lesson that it doesn't have to be loud to actually be impactful. And that also relates back to disability, right? Every conversation, that, happened in Zoom, I would turn on the captioning and all of a sudden I didn't have to turn the captioning on anymore. People just did it. Because they saw the value in having those captions on. It might be, Otter AI captions that are not CART, but whatever, we'll take it. But again, like no one asked me, I didn't ask for permission. No one told me I could do it. I just did it. And all of a sudden everybody was keeping captions on and putting their pronouns next to their names in Zoom. So yeah, there's a lot of value in sort of being quiet and sneaky.
Got it. Adriana?
Yeah, to kind of go off what JJ and Bree have said, I really do think that looking at what you can do personally, it can be, such a huge thing. And I just wanted to share an example of that I have done being the children's librarian, doing story time. I have been adding visuals to a lot of things, which I didn't think would be so revolutionary, but a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. And so I have created for my story time this signage that has like high contrast, simple images, and it has text in English and text in Spanish. And I love that I can do something like that that's so simple, but it reaches so many people where, my non-readers, if they're disabled or if they're English language learners, a lot of people can be served by this one thing, kind of like a universal design kind of way. And so for me, just looking for those little moments where I can add something that I think will have a huge impact. That's really my recommendation, is to see where you can find those little moments to try and open things up for people and welcome them into something that may not have been accessible to them before.
Awesome. Let me go to Theodore.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said. I won't take up time repeating it. So I'm just gonna throw out some like quick action things you could look into based on kind of what you're working. So if you're working directly with patrons, just first of all, like learning basic disability etiquette, not staring at people, not expecting things like eye contact all the time, knowing how to act if people are stuttering, like don't interrupt people unless they've asked you to help, like those kind of things. If you're doing instruction, look at things maybe that are geared towards teachers or professors talking about accessible teaching practices. If you are making signage, that's a huge one, as Adriana has already talked about. The amount of signs that I've seen where it's like zero color contrast is too many. Um, if you're helping people with research, knowing what databases are and aren't accessible, mostly aren't, but that can be helpful. I think that goes back to what Chancey said in the keynote about learning the different ways that someone can work around um, identifying their need and knowing, okay, maybe what works for me best when I'm researching is to use doTERRA to hold on all my notes, but that might not work best for someone else. Knowing different methods so that you can meet patrons where they're at. I'm trying to run through, oh, collections. We haven't talked a lot about collections. The first disability advocacy that I ever did in libraries was building a book display of disabled authors, because so many people write about disability and some of them are making a lot of it up. And so I wanted to highlight the books that we had in our collection, and actually got to add a few also that were accessible, that were disabled authors, and put an online component with that too. So that's something, you know, making a book display doesn't necessarily require a lot of institutional power, at least at my library. I don't know at your libraries what kind of draconian process they have for book display making, but like just think about what you do in your day, and I would be shocked if there aren't one or two areas that you could pick out where there's a way that you could do it that's a little bit more accessible, or a way that you could add a little bit of disability representation. And then the most important one, though, is if you have anything to do with hiring, hire disabled people. Look at your hiring processes. If you're not getting any disabled applicants, that doesn't mean that no one wants to come work at your library. You maybe need to look at, okay, how is this getting sent out? Is it accessible? What am I expecting out of interviews? What am I expecting out of resumes? Like, that's really the most important, because you might be the only person in your library doing it now. How can you look so that 5-10 years from now, the new staff that you're getting are either disabled themselves or have some level of competency at least related to disability?
Awesome. That's so important. So on this question, we're going to end with Nikolai.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I mean, everyone else spoke, so I wanted to have something to say too. No, I do actually have something to say. I mean, I think beyond agreeing with what has been shared, I think to the extent that you can, do and create what you can, you know, especially with others. That's kind of the theme of what I'm saying today. Find your others, find your people, and then do what you can with them. That doesn't have to be taking the usual path. It doesn't have to be creating the same kinds of resources. You don't have to ask for permission or forgiveness. And maybe you want to get into an institution eventually. Maybe you don't. But while you're not affiliated with an institution, take some risks. Obviously, you have to be careful of your own livelihood, but sometimes not having institutional backing allows you to say things, do things that you would not be able or willing to do if you were afraid of losing a specific job. And then I think maybe controversially, if you are affiliated with an institution, liberate things, take things from your institution and make them widely available. Steal. I'll end with that. Steal from your institutions and give them to as many people as possible.
All right, thank you so much. So the last question I have for everybody is to share a moment of disabled joy that you've experienced recently. And I'll just take a point of privilege real quick to say that I think working in libraries, primarily with disabled people, is a great place to see lots of moments of disability joy unfolding. One that we experienced recently, we recently started teaching blind people to draw using affordable tools that create raised line drawings. And having blind people drawing for each other and sharing and talking about their drawings, and there's just no sighted people in the loop, is something really special. I haven't seen it in many places, and it's just so exciting and fun. And that's been bringing me a lot of joy. So, Adriana.
I love that. That's so great. For me, recently I have been, as I mentioned earlier, trying to make story time more accessible. And a lot of people talk about sensory story time and, what you can do to make it better. And I think going back to some of the things that we said about the small actions that you can take, that's really been my thing recently, is just like seeing these autistic kids, for example, who are starting to get overwhelmed, and going over to them and kind of helping them get through it so they can stay and enjoy the rest of story time, and then seeing the joy in their faces when they get to experience this thing. It just makes me so happy. And I love the kids are happy, the parents are happy. Nothing breaks my heart more than when a parent feels like they have to remove their child from the library space because they're too loud or too rambunctious. I want that kid to stay and have a wonderful experience in the library, just like I did as a kid. So I've seen a lot of examples of that recently, with just autistic joy, lots of happy hand flapping and singing, and that just makes me happy, and it's why I love what I do. So that's been my joy recently.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, JJ?
I think Bree was first.
Okay, I was mixing things up because you're quick on the draw, but okay.
I can go first. That's fine.
All right, go for it.
So for
I see
me,
you, Bree, though.
for me, it's been the worst 3 years of my life. Like, both my parents have died. I didn't get tenure. I'm out of a full-time job. It's been horrible, legit. And in the last like 6 months, individuals with disabilities have sent me notes on public forums or through email saying, hey, you changed my life. You've changed my career. You've made me a better person because of the work you do. And, when you're crushed under the weight of so much crap that is just emotionally exhausting, having that little boost of, you are doing good work, fellow disabled person, keep it up, don't stop. You are making a difference in someone's life. Like, that has been so soothing and so good for my pretty shattered self-confidence. Like, I can't even articulate how important those little moments have been. So yeah, I mean, if you think you can't or shouldn't say to somebody, I really appreciate you and I appreciate the things that you're doing, no, you should say those things, because you don't know what that person is going through, or what's going on with them. So yeah, disability joy, supporting each other and moving forward. And, sometimes that support is just hey, I get it, you're tired, but you're doing good work and don't stop. So yeah, maybe not as joyful as like, a pride parade, but it's what I got.
It's so important to focus on those things when challenging times hit, and making meaning out of your experience, especially when your experience is hard, it can be a joyful part of the work to find those things to be joyful about when it's not easy. Joy is what keeps us going, right? What about you, Bree?
Yeah, so I actually think I'm gonna pick something from like more of my personal life, because it's funny, despite my scholarship and like my professional life, I'm very loud and I'm very vocal. That's not really how I am at home. I'm pretty quiet about some of these things. But recently I have found a new friend through book club who has some similar disabilities as myself, and regards to like anxiety. And it just makes me think of Mia Mingus's term of access intimacy, like having a person who just gets you and what you're going through without you having to like use the spoons to explain why you're feeling the things that you're feeling. And so finding a new friend that we kind of have that relationship, and I can like just be honest and not feel like I have to explain things when I'm having a very bad day like it was last Thursday. I don't know. I think that in itself is disability joy, like finding those like relationships where you have access, intimacy, and just feeling encouraged by one another is one of those things. And oh, thank you. I pulled up the link and you beat me to it. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, I highly recommend the blog that Adriana put in the chat of Mia Mingus's. So
Best. And Theodore? I think Theodore is going to close us out.
Yeah, so mine is I've had a lot of problems with our campus dining, with it not being accessible in a variety of ways, but particularly in terms of like just the sensory overload that is our dining hall. And I'd advocated some for that. Um, but as a junior, like I stopped going to dining because I had an apartment kitchen, and so I wasn't really in the loop on what was happening anymore. But then I my supervisor, not at the library, I work other jobs on campus because I need the money, um, mentioned that they had gotten new chairs in the dining hall, like replaced the chairs with ones that didn't make as much noise to push in and out because of the sensory considerations. And my supervisor was like, "Yeah, that was great work that you brought that up." And I was like, I didn't really, that wasn't me directly. Like, I never said, let's get new chairs. But me starting to talk about some of the other dining issues then led to more, I think, awareness from dining services about how many students on our campus had different kinds of neurodivergence or other sensory related needs, and that people really would appreciate the change. And so that was a big moment for me because it showed me that the change I made was going to last even when I wasn't in the room. Which, like, as an undergraduate student, I'm graduating in a couple of months. So it's important for me to know that everything's not just going to go back, that things are going to keep moving forward, even as I move on to another institution. So that was a moment of surprise and then joy.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think we're at time. So thank you all so much for your honesty and your stewardship and your allyship in sharing with us today. And I'll hand it back to our hosts.
Thank you so much. Again, let's give all of our wonderful speakers a loud round of applause for so much. I want to always say that I'm humbled and inspired by, the work that you guys do, your courage, your wisdom, your expertise. and your excellence. We do this again pretty much every month, but I'm always awed and inspired by what I hear. As a school, iSchool, EDU, our role is to create the space for such conversations, and we will be archiving and sharing this today publicly, so that's findable and searchable on the internet, and also via YouTube, which we are finding to be a really exceptionally great way to share such as today. Also want to thank our extremely hardworking and dedicated students and staff that have made this possible. So first of all, Masuko Friedland and Nicole Azoff, and then our tech team, Alfredo Alcantar and Samantha Fidelvera, for all of their tech support. Vivian Zuo, who's our events coordinator, and also Nicole Purviance, our director in marketing, for their significant role in making today a success. Please join us for our future symposia. So we will start again in September with Hispanic Latino Month. Again, this full transcript, recording, and summary of today will be posted on our website within the next couple of weeks, and a video and also a short highlight video of today's session will be on our YouTube channel as well. So that being said, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and have a great day.